Hey everybody, Max Boltman here alongside The Athletic's Corey Proman and Scott Wheeler and Flow Hockey's Chris Peters for another episode of the Athletic Hockey Show Prospect Series. Ton to get to today. Scott and Corey had a new 2-round mock out. Center class deep dive we got coming on tap today. World Championship updates, Memorial Cup preview. But I want to start, Corey, with an article that you had come out on Thursday breaking down Gavin McKenna versus Ivar Stenberg. And the way I want to do this is I really want to kind of have each of us kind of make the case on one side of this debate. It's a really interesting one at the top. I mean, I know McKenna is the bigger name, Chris, but Ivar Stenberg has had as good a draft eligible season as you could hope for from a young winger.
Yeah, no question about it. I mean, I think that the interesting thing about Stenberg is how much of an argument he's created with his play this season, and as many points as Gavin McKenna had in college this year, you look at Stenberg's season in the SHL, and it, from a points per games perspective, the second best ever season for a draft eligible player. From a raw points perspective, the third best, and he's trailing the Sedins, and they had each other, which is like a cheat code. So Stenberg, there's a lot of different reasons why there can be an argument made for Stenberg versus Gavin McKenna. And I think it's not just that, that competition against the professionals and the way that he showed out. He had a great World Juniors as well, which I think most people saw and would argue, on Stenberg's behalf because of that. But I think for me, it comes down to style of play. Between the two players, I think that Stenberg has the opportunity to play more on the interior because he goes to the interior a little bit more for a wing. I think that he makes a lot of plays competitively in terms of puck pursuit and doing things he needs to do to get the puck back. So I think that there's a lot of things that he brings to the table. I think there's a bit more tenacity to him. And that's not to say that McKenna isn't tenacious enough, but I just think that Stenberg overall has a little bit more jam in his game. And then on top of that, he's not giving away a ton of skill. I think he's very skilled. He's got the opportunity to make a lot of plays, scores goals. Really like the player overall. I think he just brings a lot to the table. So I think it's an argument. I wouldn't necessarily 100% say Stenberg over McKenna. But I think that there's a lot of the reasons that I mentioned are among the reasons that there's an actual argument to be had.
I think you can say that McKenna's not tenacious enough.
Thank you, Scott. That's good. Yes, let's say that.
All right, pretend you didn't hear who that one was coming from, and we'll go to Scott now. Scott, I want you to make the case for Gavin McKenna as the best wing in this class.
The case for Gavin McKenna has always been about the skill uptick. Like I think you just look across the board, the playmaking, the IQ, the finesse on the puck, the feel in the offensive zone. Stenberg gets high marks in all of those areas. There are some special traits in those areas for Gavin McKenna. And if you're picking first overall, you want a player who has a special quality, an ability to break open a game, an ability to pull you out of your seat. And nobody in this draft does that more frequently than McKenna. In fact, I don't think there are many players in this draft that actually do that very often at all. Gavin has that. Gavin has, even if it comes and goes, when it comes, when he sees a play open up, when there's a play to be made, when there's an opportunity to create a scoring chance in the offensive zone and the puck is in his hands, if you're picking a player in this draft that you want to have the puck in their hands in the offensive zone, it's Gavin. So I think that has always been the case for Gavin, is that just from a pure skill, IQ, offensive sense level, it's just I think he's in a slightly different tier than Ivar. And I think Ivar's in a very high tier in all of those areas.
So basically what that comes down to me, as I hear that, Corey, is like, this is a choose your flavor situation. Do you want the guy who's kind of conducting from the outside? He's manipulating plays and he's going to find that seam, or do you want a little bit more of the interior driver who maybe gives up a little bit of the dynamic element, not all of it, to Chris's point? I mean, how do you kind of parse two players like this where both high-end talents who do it a little different?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Ed. The two of them, I can think, outline a lot of the arguments that I made in the article, and to kind of, basically simplify it is, McKenna's been the offense guy, is, historic production wherever he goes, the off the charts skill and offense, and Stenberg just a little bit more competitive, translatable style of play. I think sometimes in these debates we can be, people want absolutes, and I think that the debate may stray a little bit from reality. Stenberg doesn't have the level of offense that McKenna has, doesn't have a little skill that McKenna has. But as Scott said, he does have offense. Like, he has high end skill, even if it isn't the special game-breaking caliber of McKenna. And even though Stenberg is a more competitive player than McKenna, and obviously played very well against men, even now the World Championships, he's showing you he can win battles against men. I think McKenna's compete level, I definitely think he's a little perimeter and he's inconsistent. I don't think he's soft though. This is not a not competitive player. This is a guy who's played up age levels for years, plays big minutes wherever he goes. He's not competitive. It's just, I think usually when you pick one overall, you'd like that trait to be an asset. It's not an asset for this player, especially when you're 5'11". That is a concern. The way I would kind of parse this is, I think there's a path for Gavin McKenna to score 100 points in the NHL, a realistic path. Not saying he's going to, but I think he has a path to get to that point where he could be a 100-point scorer in the NHL, a true star if things go well in his development. I've watched a lot of Ivar Stenberg over the last few years. I've never come away from a game of his being like, holy hell, this guy's a game breaker. He could score 100 points in the NHL. I don't see that. Not saying it can't happen. I've been wrong before on plenty of players. I just have a harder time seeing him get to that level. So that to me would be one of the tiebreakers there. That'd be kind of in Gavin's favor. Is I just think the skill differential there for me is larger than the compete differential is. That I would make me lean that way. But I could see somebody who really didn't like the way McKenna competed at times this season say it goes the other way. It's tough though, because we've used the Marner comparison. Obviously, that's in light of the last few weeks. I think some people would gladly take that.
It's becoming more and more flattering by the day right now.
But if you say the Panarin comparison, he just got acquired for Liam Gretry, a few months ago. So the Marner comparison is interesting because I don't think it's apt. It's just funny because it's Toronto, so we say it. Because Marner's a better off puck player. This is a guy who's a very elite two-way player, and McKenna at the same age, I would argue, is more skilled than Marner was. Marner was an exceptional junior player, elite scorer, but this guy's skill is like a level above that. It's tough. I really sympathize with some of the people who have to make these decisions because these are not simple decisions. We know what the popular decision is, and we know what the likely decision is going to be. But there's some tensions here, and I think there's going to be strong opinions in the rooms in Toronto, in San Jose, in Vancouver about which way to go with this.
What's interesting here, Scott, is I feel like we've talked about the debate about the winger and the positional premium. I feel like we've only really ever had that about McKenna. I don't think we've really talked about Stenberg at number one really at all. I mean, maybe around mid-season, right around the World Juniors, but it's really kind of been, if it's one, we're talking about McKenna, and then when we get past one or get past two, then you kind of are debating the two wingers against each other. Do you get what I'm saying? Why is it that we kind of feels like we're talking about only if it's going to be a winger at one, it's going to be McKenna, and otherwise there's the debate. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think part of that is just because McKenna has dominated the coverage in this draft class. McKenna is the name. McKenna is central to every conversation. But I think it is an interesting conversation because it's a conversation that isn't just happening at one, that if Gavin McKenna goes number one, it's a conversation that is going to continue to happen at two and potentially three in terms of Ivar Stenberg and that piece of the puzzle. And I think part of the reason we haven't maybe had that conversation as much with Stenberg is because there's not as much to nitpick. There aren't as many winger flaws inherently in Stenberg's game. In McKenna's game, it's evident. You watch him and there are warts, there are issues, there are hiccups, there were bad games this year. Stenberg did cool off a little bit in the second half himself in the SHL as well, but now he's finishing strong at Men's Worlds, and there's just a consistent effort level, a consistent heaviness on pucks to Stenberg that we don't see in McKenna. And I think as a result, the conversation has just gravitated so much around Gavin. But you're absolutely, in terms of the way that this is going to take place, it's the position conversation isn't exclusively a Gavin McKenna conversation. It's going to be happening until both of those players are picked.
What's everybody's NHL comp for Stenberg? Mine has been Gensel.
I really like that one. I mean, I see a lot of that when I watch play. I don't think he's that different from Lucas Raymond, but I think that Gensel, kind of the profile of getting to the slot and getting the goal, playing down low, really fits him.
He uses Stützle, but he doesn't have the skating that Tim has or had, so I've never really seen that. When I did my feature on him, and I asked a bunch of people in and around the SHL that same question, one of the names that I heard that I didn't hate was Zetterberg. I'm not sure whether he's ever going to have the defensive sort of value that Zetterberg provided, but in terms of the size, the shape, the strength over his stick, the skill level, getting to the interior a little bit more, I could see Zetterberg maybe a little. But those were the names that came up in my conversation. Zetterberg was mentioned like 3 or 4 times. I don't know whether that's just been a talking point amongst Swedish media or Swedish SHL coaches or that kind of a thing, but Zetterberg was the name that I heard.
Yeah,
Chris?
I definitely felt like I like the Raymond comparison, and I think that there's been a lot there. I think, the Ivar is probably even a little bit harder than Raymond was at that same age, but not significantly so. But yeah,
I like Ivar a little bit more as a prospect than I did Lucas.
Yeah, I think he's a little more quick twitch with the feet. But I guess I asked that question because just use all those names. If you said Gensel, Raymond, or Zetterberg, and I told you were guaranteed to walk away at first overall, guaranteed to get that player, how do you feel?
Perfectly good. Those are really good players.
Those are really good players, but I'm saying, like, is this like you feel like we got the franchise building block here, like we're all set, or you're feeling like
on
good
Zetterberg
player?
It would be on Zetterberg,
yes,
feel
yeah.
But he's also a center,
yeah.
I mean, it just comes back to my trademarked line. There's no number 1 this year. So
no, I
have you said that before,
point.
Chris?
I feel like I've said it a few times.
I guess I make that point because, like, if you told me you were going to get Raymond, or maybe not guaranteed, let's say good chance you can get Raymond or Gensel. We'll remove Zetterberg for a second. I feel like I'm excited. But if you told me I had a good chance, I'm saying we do have a good chance. Let's say I had a good chance to get Patrick Kane or Kucherov. I think now you're excited, right? Like now you're like, okay, like this is a ball player we can work with. And I think that the debate on McKenna is what is the probability that's actually going to happen? Is that actually the projection, or there's some distinction between him and Kane, or distinction between him and Kucherov that will prevent that from happening? But I can see how you could talk yourself into McKenna at 1. I have a harder time talking myself into Stenberg at 1. That's kind of where I'm going with this. Well, like I feel like when teams get into their meeting, there will be somebody they will like more than Stenberg because he's a 5'11" wing and because he's not like pull you out of your seats dynamic. I feel like there will be teams that will come out of their meeting. More teams will come out of their meeting with McKenna at 1 because some of them will buy it that he's Kane. Not saying that he is going to be Kane, but there will be more teams that will buy that than they will buy that Stenberg has like the 90-plus point potential.
Just devil's advocate here, I think it's also easier to talk yourself out of Gavin. It's probably easier to talk yourself into him, but I think it's also easier to talk yourself out of him because of the flaws and because there are just going to be scouts in every room that watched him play a few times this year and didn't like what they saw.
I do think, though, that's kind of a good answer to what I was trying to get at with Scott, though, Corey, is because, like, you said if you could guarantee that it's Gensel, Raymond, Zetterberg, but you can't guarantee it. So if you're going to be in that situation at 1, you obviously really want the highest upside player, but you're also and you're weighing everything against. Like, there's a chance that we might view Stenberg as maybe like a safer pick than McKenna, but if the upside's lower, it's a narrower band, and at 1, I think you certainly don't want to have someone who doesn't live up to the expectation, but I get what you're saying. You're trying to chase the best possible outcome at 1. You gotta be a little bit of an optimist when you're picking at 1.
Right. I mean, Scott poo-pooed when I brought up Yakupov the other week, but I mean, that's in the cards. I think Lafreniere's in the cards, you have to at least talk about those outcomes too. Like you look at like Lafreniere's scoring track record in the queue and compare it to McKenna's, it's not like that far away of a track record. There's some overlap there. It's I think these are all things I don't think McKenna's any guarantee. I just was making the point that I can see how somebody would conclude that he's the best player. I have a harder time with this class with these good defensemen and Malhotra saying everybody get to the end of their process and conclude that Stenberg is the best player. That's just more the point I was trying to make. That's saying that's how I would have it ordered.
No, it's a good answer to the question. You mentioned Malhotra there. Let's take a quick break right now. We're going to come back. We're going to go deep on the center class this year because it's probably a deeper, more interesting class than we've given the airtime to so far on the show. We'll be right back. All right, we are back, and I want to get into the center class now here, Corey, and let's start with the guy you mentioned right before we went to the break, Caleb Malhotra. He's kind of become the consensus top center in the class. We know that usually does not last long on draft day. Scott's got him 4th. You've got him 6th. So it's obviously a tight cluster at the top, but when you're talking about a guy who's 4 and 6, and yet we're kind of consistently talking about him in the top 3, I wonder, like, how high could this guy go?
I feel like when I talk to teams, the conversation, they feel like Toronto has to at least have that conversation with him at 1. I feel it's a little rich for me. But the issue for me with Malhotra, getting him all the way up there, and I thought he looked tremendous the second half of the year. I thought he looked tremendous when all the players in Brantford left for the World Juniors, and he went on that crazy run in around like January. Great playoff there. But there was a lot of times where I watched Malhotra on Brantford, and I thought he was the 3rd or 4th best player on his team. You think you could argue that Jiricek, Jake O'Brien, Adam Benak, those were massive contributors on that team as well. This is a guy who didn't have, he didn't have a monster year in the OHL. He didn't have a monster year in the BCHL the year before that. The elite scoring track record basically just lasts 3 weeks, essentially. And I would have a hard time getting him over McKenna, who's done it for his whole life, who's done it over Stenberg, who has an elite scoring track record for years. Now he's 3 inches bigger. He's a full year younger. He's a center. He's two-way. There's a lot that goes right for him. I have a hard time getting him there. I think somebody will get him there, though. I think, just from my conversations, I think a lot of people, I view him as a potential 2. I think a lot of people in the league view him as a 2. But there's enough people who think he has at least a chance to be a 1. And if you buy that there's that chance there, then he's going real early. Like, go ahead.
When you say like a 2 with a chance to be a 1, let's like give people some concept. Like, I know you've used Beniers on him before, but I think like Hischier would kind of fit that bill. Hischier is a 2 on New Jersey, but could be someone's 1, and on the right year can absolutely be a 1.
Yeah, I think when I've watched Malhotra's best games, I've viewed him as potentially Hischier. I would not say I've seen that player consistently enough, though, to say that that's my projection.
So more of an upside than a true comp.
Like I said, it's tough because people will argue he's like so skinny and he's developing, and look at he's a late bloomer. It's the Beckett Seneca trajectory, and the next, he's just going to take off from here. And I get it, and it could happen, but to pass on some of those guys who've been doing it for years, and it's a big bet for me, but I think it's going to happen because he's the center, because he's so young, because he looked so good towards the end of the year. And you look at the history of the draft, and you look at just the league in general, getting a first-line center outside of the draft is nearly impossible. And if someone thinks he has at least a decent chance to become that, he's going to go among the first few picks.
To Corey's point, too, there just haven't been as many of those touchdowns. He had the OHL playoffs. He was the best player, I thought, at the CHL USA Prospects Challenge in November. He was really, really consistently good all year. Started on a third line there in Brantford because of how deep they were. They quickly realized he was on PP1 from day one, but they quickly realized through training camp and the early part of the season that this kid couldn't be their third line center. And then once he was elevated, he was unbelievable. But to Corey's point, that he didn't play because of the BCHL. He didn't play at the Holinka last summer. There isn't that body of work that those other players have, including some of the D, who've had 2 tremendous years of junior hockey, right? So that part of it, I think, is the challenge the hurdle that Caleb has to clear here. I think the benefit that Caleb has is that you talk to anybody who's watched him play this year, and you won't find a single scout or a single person around the OHL who doesn't love the player, the kid. You hear the word captain tossed around. Like there's just elements to Caleb above and beyond how good he was this year, and he was very, very, very good this year. But it's just sort of the complete package with Caleb, and so then it boils down to how much you value those things, how much you value the two-way details, who he is off the ice, the development runway versus the kids who've shown it to you.
Fun question for you, Max, because let's say we put the Raymond comparison for Stenberg, just as an example. If Seattle offered Beniers for Raymond, who says no?
I think Detroit says no.
Detroit, for sure.
Is it an easy no, though?
I think so. I mean, Raymond, he wasn't their leading scorer this past year, but he's a guy that you kind of expect to be your leading scorer. The reason that, in theory, the reason Seattle would look to trade Beniers is because they need that type of guy. They have their, plethora of centers. I get that. But I think it's an easy enough no. Yeah.
Interesting. I don't think I think I agree with you. I think Detroit says no. I feel like they'd have to think about it, though. I think it's also like, I get they have Casper Danielson, they have a lot of these guys kind of thing, but I just mean the player type it's still an 18-minute a night centerman. Like that's I feel like the argument
just isn't there though.
No, it isn't. That's the argument but I think that's the stress points there is, can you find Beniers easier on the open market, or can you find Raymond easier on the open market?
They're both hard to find. The one that I keep coming back to on Malhotra is we had I think a very similar conversation last year about another Caleb Desnoyers. Now, to Chris's point about is there really a number one this year? These are very different draft classes last year. There was Matthew Schaefer, and there was 2 other guys you could plausibly buy as centers in front of Caleb Desnoyers, and that's why he goes 4. But if he's close to Caleb Desnoyers, Scott, and I'd love to get your opinion on who you like better at the same stage. That is an argument in a kind of shallower draft class. Maybe not. It's a longer top tier probably than last year, but the top end isn't the same. Like I think that's probably the argument to get this guy into the top 3.
There are a lot of similar, and we've talked about it a little bit on the show. There are a lot of similarities between the two in terms of their production in the playoffs, their size, their position, the way people talked about the details and the captain pieces of the puzzle and the intangibles. I do think when you watch the 2 players that Caleb he's a better skater, and I think he made a more skill plays
this year. You can't say Caleb.
Or Malhotra. I do think Malhotra is the better skater and made more plays, a higher quantity of plays, not by a lot, but a few more sort of high end plays this year than Desnoyers did.
Yeah, I would probably rate him ahead of Desnoyers right now. And the other thing, there's another element that I wanted to talk about because, Corey said if you're Toronto and you at least have to have the conversation. Let's talk about this from when we talk about the character, the other things, the intangibles, the opportunity that you have with a player of that nature. Is he as exciting? He is not as exciting as McKenna. I can tell you that pretty quickly. I don't think he's as exciting as Stenberg, to be completely honest. I do think that there's an argument to be had that he may be a best fit. You think about the opportunity to be within the opportunity in the market, that the pressure that would come with being the number 1 overall pick of the Toronto Maple Leafs, and you say, I think that's going to have to be part of the assessment here is who has the capability to do that. You've already got your number 1 center, for the foreseeable future, assuming that Matthews stays. Where does, how much of a benefit would a player like Malhotra be if you're Toronto? So these are the kind of conversations you have to have. You look at the pressure that Gavin was under all season this year. I think he's practiced in terms of the pressure of different things. The question is Caleb with the NHL bloodlines, Malhotra, that is, with the NHL bloodlines and the different things that he has kind of come from. how he would handle that kind of situation. I think it's difficult to know. But I think that has to be part of the calculus of the decision making. And what ultimately are we doing with this pick, and how getting it right. On top of that, the premium position possibility, and if you believe that there's a chance that he could be your number one in the future, does that bring more value to you than having a number one, a top line winger? That'll be, the question they'll have to ask themselves.
And I do know there have been some evaluators that have gotten to the end of the process here and have at least had him ahead of Stenberg, and some have had him ahead of McKenna for the reasons that we've discussed at length.
Yep.
So behind Malhotra in the center class, Corey, are two guys that I think we can kind of talk about together: Viggo, Bjorck, and Tynan Lawrence. At one point, you had Tynan Lawrence as the number one player in this class. Things changed. It's an evolving list. I don't think you have him there now. I don't remember who you have higher on your most recent list between him and Bjorck, but it feels like they're kind of a class together, right?
Yeah, I have Bjorck ahead. I think both of them kind of go 6 to 12, 6 to 13, whatever. Like they're both kind of going to go. There's that top group of wingers, Malhotra, and then I think once those guys go and maybe a couple at the D, then you start talking about them, because I think they're the next group, not only the next centers, but they're the next group of forwards too. I don't think there's a winger that gets everybody super excited. Belchez kind of does, Hemming kind of does, but I feel like Bjork's, the way he's ended this season, you said they're close, but their season's gone very differently. Lawrence had a really disaster of a season. Bjork's had a fantastic season and has been playing very well now at the Men's World Championships. I kind of view, Bjorck as that, if you're drafting him that high, I think you would draw a line between him and like Logan Stankoven and say, I think he could be that kind of player. Frank Nazar is another name that's come to mind for me with Bjorck, and, Frank went 13. Marco Rossi went 9, so that's kind of the range you're thinking of. I think in this draft where there isn't a ton of centers, it could elevate, even though he's 5'9", and I think he's shown against men that there is a strong chance he can play center
for sure
at the higher level. So I think he stays in that top 10 conversation. And despite his lackluster second half, there's still a lot of people in the league I talk to. Not everyone. There's some people who have dropped Lawrence significantly, but there's still a lot of people I talk to who have him in the top 10 conversation, just because he's one of, if not the best pure skater in the draft. He's a 6'1" center. He still has the body of work is still, less impressive than we thought it was going to be, but it's still a decent, it's still a pretty good body of work. So I still think these are still going to be among the very first forwards who are going to go in this draft class.
Wouldn't you say, I think one of the biggest separating factors, because obviously there's a size difference, there's all those things, but wouldn't you say that the hockey sense is a defining separation between the two?
Yeah, I mean, Bjorck has way more offense, makes way more plays. Lawrence is more athletic. Like the skating is way better. The size, obviously. I think, and Bjorck is more competitive. I mean, they're just way different players.
Yeah, they're not. Yeah, that's the thing, is they are very different. There's really not a lot of similarities between the two, but I just think that every time I watch Viggo Bjorck play, I was like, oh, this guy just knows how to play hockey. He just knows how to play hockey. There's nothing there. Like, he has some of the best hockey sense for me in this entire draft. I think that his ability to figure out how he needs to play in every situation is fascinating. What really sold me on Viggo ahead of Tynan is the playoffs that he played. Djurgårdens was using him in pretty high leverage situations.
Checking first lines.
Yes. He was matching up, and now he goes to the World Championship. He's the youngest scorer in the history of Sweden's national team, goal scorer in the history of Sweden's national team. And they're putting him in those positions to succeed. They're leaning on him, and they have NHL players. I mean, it's incredible to watch how much respect he has among his peers, among the coaches that have coached him. It is, he's just kind of a Swiss Army knife player that can do a lot of things just in a pretty small package. So he's one of those mini knives, I suppose. But either way, those are pretty still usable.
Despite the size difference, he's also way stronger over pucks.
Yeah, he is.
Like, it was a major issue for Tynan at the college level, and it has not been an issue for Viggo at the professional level. Like, that's one of the things all of his teammates talk about, is just like, this kid is strong.
I think we all right now have Viggo ahead of Lawrence, but I think when it comes time down to it, I think it's a 50-50 who's going to go first. Because I think there's going to be a lot of teams that are going to struggle with the idea of taking a 5'9" center in the top 10 who's not an elite skater. I think they're going to say, like, they're going to wonder, like, he's awesome now. Is it going to be awesome in 5 years? Despite, think about Bjorck is he's so likable the way he plays because he's so hardworking. He's very consistent. He plays both ways. I do think if I was to make a minor criticism, is despite his great hockey sense, I don't know if his puck play is like prolific. Like I think if you draft a smaller forward like that at a super high point in the draft, you're thinking there's a path for him to get to 80, 90 points. I know I never seen a game of his where I've bought that as his offensive ceiling. Not saying he can't get there, but I think those are going to be the minor debates. I still think everyone's going to have this guy rated very highly. Like he's going very early in this draft. It's just a matter of what the slot actually is.
Tynan's not getting, like, have you ever felt that Tynan could get to 80, 90 points?
No, but I think that's going to be the conversation is if you, like, I think people would say Lawrence is, if he's not a 2, he's a 3. I feel like with Bjorck the argument, whether right or wrong, is going to be like, we're not playing this guy in our bottom 6. Yeah. That's going to be the conversation some teams are going to have.
Yeah, because like if you look at the Stankoven argument, like I would say that Logan had a more proven scoring track record as a younger player as well.
Maybe Bjork's underage scoring was really good.
Yeah.
Like
his U20. Yeah, like it was
and if he were playing,
setting. It was historic.
Like if he were playing in the WHL this year,
Stankoven went in the mid-second round too.
Yeah. Exactly. But now that we see that should not have happened, as some perhaps even on this podcast, I think probably all three of us had said.
I love Stankoven. Did anybody here have him top 8, top 10?
No.
Okay,
I had him in the first round.
I think we all did. That's my point. Is there's a little bit different of a risk assessment there
for sure.
I think the fact that he's done it against men and what he did at the World Juniors this year distinguishes him from Stankoven.
Interesting.
With either of these two players, Corey. I mean, we talked about it with McKenna. You can kind of talk yourself up and feel like, okay, this guy could be Kucherov, could be this. How high can you get yourself on Bjorck? If you like, could you talk yourself into him being a first line center?
Yeah, I feel like it's frustrating. I'm gonna say a name, and it's frustrating because I feel like we use this one every year. Every year, Braden Point.
Yeah,
and I feel like there's
always one.
Yes, I mean that's the risk, right? That's why people are gonna be like, it's going to come up in NHL meetings and people are going to be like, I thought I've heard this one before. Yeah. I heard it last year. I heard it the year before that. I heard it the year before that. Still waiting on them.
Well, but the reason that we use Braden Point so much, the reason that we use Vincent Trocheck so much is because there's only so many guys of this profile at that size. And we don't have a wide menu to choose from. And so on one hand, that tells you like, yep, that's why you're hearing it. And on the other hand, it's maybe a little bit of a caution flag of like, if everyone's Braden Point on their projection, but they all end up being Frank Nazar or Logan Stankoven, great players, but not Braden Point. That's worth kind of filing away, I think.
Also, I definitely like Braden Point also wasn't a top 10 pick.
Yeah, but I guess but he's a first line center, a Stanley Cup winner. Like it's
Heck, I used Braden Point with Frank Nazar that year.
With all the good things Bjorck has done, I think if you told like hockey people that's the projection, they wouldn't think that's unreasonable. Bjorck has done almost everything you could have asked for him this year, other than produce what Stenberg did essentially in the SHL this year.
Yeah, I mean, even like Zach Benson is a winger. If you told me Zach Benson was going to play center, I think it would look a lot like Viggo Bjorck. And that's we're seeing Benson be one of the better players in the playoffs right now. We're seeing Stankoven be one of the better players in the playoffs right now. These are always the hangups. Guys of this size, Jackson Blake, right? And I think Bjork's better than Jackson Blake. So it's that's to me I can talk myself into Bjorck as a 1. I don't know that I can get there on Lawrence.
Well, with Benson, with Stankoven, with Seth Jarvis, the similarity there is they all have off the charts compete.
Yeah,
which is what Bjorck has, which is why I think he's still a really good candidate to go in the top 10. But these are not substantial criticisms; these are minor criticisms as you try to parse which one of these two you want to take.
Is there a gap, Scott, between those two guys? How wide is the gap, I should say, between those two guys and, let's say, Oliver Suvanto and Alexander Command, who I think are kind of the next guys that we expect to go in the top 20 in the center class.
Well, I've grown on Command. I'm a big fan of Command. I don't think Command is all that far behind where I have Lawrence at this point. The Suvanto, I'm in a completely different place on. Like, I just haven't been able to get to any kind of belief that Suvanto is more than a bottom 6 center in the league. Now, a 6'3" heavy bottom 6 center is still a valuable player, but it's not a player that you consider taking in the range that we just talked about those two guys. So I do think there's a pretty significant gap there for me between Suvanto and those guys. I think Command's that next center for me now. Like, Morozov was in that conversation at different points. Suvanto was in that conversation at different points. Command, the consistency of Command's play this year, how hard he is on pucks, his contact skills, I think there's a real player there. I still don't think there's quite enough offense there to sort of bridge that gap, but he's in that next tier. Like, I fully expect that Command goes in the teens at this point. And if we're talking about one of those two centers going in the early teens and he goes in the late teens, then there's not actually that much of a gap on draft day.
The difference between him and Lawrence would just be skating, but otherwise I think like they're like offense are definitely close.
And I think Command's a good skater. Might not be like top of the class good, but he's a good skater.
Yeah. You're right. I just think that Lawrence is a premier skater.
Who would you guys have as that sort of fourth center? I
have Suvanto.
It'd be a toss up, but I think I'd probably lean to Command with you, Scott.
Oh, fourth center. Sorry. Yeah, I would have Command and then I do have Suvanto as the fourth center. Sorry, I'm misremembering things here right now.
Yeah, I have them back to back right now. I have Suvanto just ahead.
And the thing is that even though Command doesn't have Suvanto's size, like, this is still a guy who I think is going to produce on the interior. He's going to be around the net. He's going to dig around the blue paint, Corey.
Yeah, I think, really young player. I think he's a couple of days away from being 27 eligible. And I think you still look at, he had a really tough second half between his club play and just his okay U18s, but the World Juniors he had was really impressive. Good first half there in between his Holinka and his Liga play. The skating is a concern. Like, he's not a dynamic player by any means, but I still think you look at a 6'3" heavy centerman with good offense. I think as he matures physically, the offense will come more at the pro level. I think there's just I think by next year he will score more, and I think he'll reassure some of our concerns. That's my projection. Obviously, Scott doesn't agree, but I think there's going to be good offense there at the next level. Not great, but good to go with his all-around play.
All right, so that's like the top cluster, Scott, but who are the other names to be kind of on the radar for the rest of the first round at the center position?
Well, there's a handful. I just mentioned Morozov there. He was the one who earliest on in the season had sort of put himself in that conversation. He got off to a great start at Miami. He was their first-line center. He was producing. He's another, to Corey's point about Command and the late birthday, another sort of really young player in the draft, the youngest player in college hockey this season. Him and Hemming ended up being a couple of days apart once Hemming arrived for the second half, but just a really strong first half, and then tailed off a little bit like Suvanto, tailed off a little bit in the second half, lost his spot as their first-line center, kind of became a middle six center for them. The production didn't sort of keep pace, but really well-rounded player, and I still think probably goes sort of in the 20s somewhere. The other ones are sort of interesting. Jack Hextall played in Youngstown in the USHL this year, and I've spoken a lot with people around the USHL and around Youngstown about him this season, and there's a lot of belief in this kid. I don't think that has necessarily shown up in public sphere rankings and that kind of a thing, but between conversations with scouts and conversations around the USHL around Hextall, like, people think he's going to be a middle six center in the league, and the offense hasn't maybe quite been there to completely sell you on that. Like, he doesn't make a ton of plays, but again, really strong on pucks, pro details, habits, skates well, has the body. He's not a tall kid, but like really thick, strong kid, and he's just smart and just looks to Chris's earlier point, like just looks like a hockey player. And then there's some sort of wild cards in that group. Brooks Rogowski's the big one, is 6'7" center, viewed as a winger by some. There are some who don't love sort of the competitiveness and that side of his game, although he did penalty kill in Oshawa this year. Going to Michigan State, interesting profile at that size. He's got some skill, like he made some plays this year, and you sort of immediately start to wonder about some of the big men that have come out of the OHL in recent years, like Kieran Walton and some of those guys. But those are kind of the names. And then Maddox Desjardins, another one who, like Rogowski, is kind of viewed as a winger by a lot of people, despite the fact that he played center in Quebec this year and is a natural center and was a first overall pick into the queue as a center. Desjardins doesn't sort of have that sort of consistent work ethic. Like that's the one thing that he's very physical. He's very talented. He's got the size, but it has come and go for him for 2 years. And he dealt with some concussions and there were some other things at play in his development, but people have wanted to see him be more consistent. And it's been a common critique of his game. So may end up as a winger. I think Rogowski may end up as a winger, but Morozov and Hextall are centers all day. Like if they make it in the NHL, they'll be playing down the middle.
All right, let's take a quick break right there. That's the center class. We're going to come back. We're going to talk about what we've seen so far at Worlds. I imagine Viggo Bjorck's name and Ivar Stenberg's name are going to come up again, and preview the Memorial Cup. Be right back. All right, let's bring this home talking about some tournaments going on right now. Not the Stanley Cup playoffs, but the Men's World Championships to start with, Chris, going on overseas right now. And there is some prospect flavor to these World Championships because of the young Swedes we've already talked about.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Ivar Stenberg and Viggo Bjorck giving us plenty to watch. Sweden has put them in a position to be contributors to the team, and they have done that already. 4 assists so far for Stenberg in the tournament, 2 points for Viggo, including a goal, the youngest goal scorer ever for Sweden at the Men's Worlds. The last time there were 2 draft eligible players on their team, it was the Sedin twins. So, this is a really outstanding opportunity, and they've given them opportunities on the power play. They've got Bjorck in the bumper. They've got Stenberg kind of working the half wall. There's a lot of different things that those guys have done, which has been outstanding to watch. I think that Sam Hallam, who has gotten lots of criticism for the way that he's coached Sweden over the last couple of tournaments that he's been in, has given these guys a lot of run. And they've come in and it rewarded them with that opportunity. And like Viggo is holding his own. Ivar is more than holding his own. Like they're not overwhelmed by the moment or the opportunity, which is only going to help their stock. When they're the 2 guys that, I think everybody's excited to see, but certainly Latvia has a couple of draft eligibles as well. Both Albert Smits and Oliver Zmernieks, both playing. Smits has been a top 4 defenseman for Latvia the whole time. They have not been very good in this tournament, but he is obviously a key player for them. So, I think it's a great last kind of reminder. And we've certainly seen guys over in the past years, Brandstad Nygaard and Solberg and others, Marco Kasper have really raised their stock at this event by what they've done. And I think that we're seeing, at least for the top 3 guys mentioned, Murnieks has played a bit of a bit role for Latvia. And then there's even Leon Kolarek with Austria. And, so there's a lot of draft eligible talent to watch here.
Do you read anything into, Corey, the fact that Viggo Bjorck has had a bigger role than Anton Frundell for Sweden?
Well, there's, I think, 2 different parts of that conversation. It goes to how competitive and dependable and smart and all the great things that Viggo Bjorck brings to the table. And is that Anton Frundell kind of had a little up and down pre-tournament that he, I've used Jekyll and Hyde with him before, and that's kind of what he is sometimes, is that, you look at in the SHL this year, there were times he was benched, and there was times he was on a torrid scoring stretch. And then he comes over to the NHL in the spring, and he was just fantastic with Chicago. And then he goes to Team Sweden, and he plays just okay. And now he gets into the lineup, and he gets 2 points. That's kind of what he is. I think, he's competitive, but doesn't have the off the charts compete that Bjorck does. So I feel like Bjorck is just Mr. Consistency. That's what he's been for 2 years. And so I see why I think scratching Frundell was a little harsh. Like, I think, given what they had, the limited skill this team brought, like they think they should have played him from the start, but it didn't surprise me. Like, I didn't agree, but it didn't surprise me.
Yeah. The other tournament I want to get, Scott, is the one that begins on Friday night, the Memorial Cup. And there's some prospect intrigue always to this one, but I think especially when Landon DuPont is at the center of this. So the teams competing in this Memorial Cup: Everett, Kelowna, the hosts, Chicoutimi, and Kitchener. Start on DuPont, but I do just kind of want to hear your overall thoughts on what you're looking for in this Memorial Cup.
I'm just looking for Landon to be the Landon that he has been. Like, he has been outstanding. He has really elevated for them this year. He had a tremendous historic season a year ago, and I think he's been a much, much better player, a much more impactful player in all three zones this year. The offense has really, really sort of found another notch. The mobility has found another notch. The one thing I wondered about with Landon early on in his development was that he was super physically advanced, and I didn't actually think he had that sort of Cale Makar, Quinn Hughes skating, and I still don't think he has that level of skating, but the shakes and the lateral mobility and all of that is very, very real, and he makes a lot of guys miss, and he's attacking downhill and playing with a ton of confidence. And then on top of that, for a 6-foot defender, he's strong and he defends really well, and he's so smart, and he looks like a potential first overall defenseman, even at sort of 6 foot and 185, 190 pounds. So I'm excited to see him live again. Like, it's been a minute since I've seen Landon live, so I'm excited about that, and I'm excited for him to demonstrate if he can really rise at an even tougher level. And the one criticism I think you have of Everett coming into this tournament is that in terms of the level of competition that Kitchener and Chicoutimi faced, the top 2-3 teams in both of those leagues, I think, were stronger than the top 2 or 3 teams in the WHL. And so this will be the biggest test of Landon's career so far.
I think looking for Landon could just be the title of our next 12 months of this show. That's our theme. That's the season, 2026-27. Predictions. I want each of you to give me a winner for the Memorial Cup. Scott, you want to start?
I'm going to go with Chicoutimi. The more I've watched this Chicoutimi team, the more impressed I've been. I think they've got the deepest blue line. That blue line is outstanding. Tourigny, Huang, Lavoie. Who else is on that? There's a fourth guy, Alexis Bernier, who just signed with Seattle. Like, their top 4 is legit. I think in Lucas Beckman, they've got the best goalie in the tournament. They don't quite have the firepower up front that Kitchener and Everett have, but Maxime Massé has really emerged this season as a star in junior hockey, and I think they've got enough behind Massé to score enough goals. And then I really like their D. Huang in particular, I think, flies under the radar as a prospect. Like, he's been very impressive this season, and Lavoie's a stud at that level and can eat minutes, and Beckman is I think the best goalie in the tournament. So I like all 3 of the non-hosts in this field, but I lean Chicoutimi, I think.
Chris?
I'm going to go with Kitchener. I think that the Rangers have that kind of championship built squad in terms of there's a heaviness to them. Sam O'Reilly is a real difference maker. Even the way that they kind of beefed up their blue line with Jared Woolley. Then they have kind of just those guys that can score for you, Jack Pridham and Dylan Edwards, who had such a great end of the season there. Really impressed by that group. And then Christian Kirsch is really kind of the goaltender. He can be the difference in the tournament. They only lost 2 games during the playoffs and really, handled themselves well. I would have loved to have seen what they would have looked like against, a full strength Barrie without, who didn't have Cole Beaudoin, or what they would have looked like against Brantford. I think it would have been a real test for them, but I just think like a guy like Sam O'Reilly at the center of everything for them is an impressive difference maker at that level.
I think O'Reilly's the best forward in this year's tournament in terms
so
of where he's currently at as a player.
3rd straight Mem Cup for him too, so he's been there, done that. This moment's not going to be too
I do
big
think
for
they
him.
need more, just quickly, but I do think they need more from Pridham. Like, Pridham saw his role reduced there late in the playoffs and wasn't a go-to guy for them, and they need him to score.
Yeah, he sat a lot of shifts and overtimes that they played this year, which is not what you want to see from your top scorer.
Corey, last word to you. Who's winning it?
Kitchener. I just think the way they play, I like just the play style. I think is just conducive to this time of year. Sam O'Reilly's been a man on a mission here the last few months. I've just been really impressed by their postseason, and I think this is their time.
All right.
Interesting that none of us picked Everett, who were number 1 in the CHL's rankings for almost the entire season.
The
Dub
issue
just
is
doesn't win at the Mem Cup.
Yeah, the issue with the Dub is that you kind of see with the Q is that there's so many teams in the Western League, and there's usually a decent number of teams that think they have a chance, and the Q realizes very quickly who doesn't have a chance, and all the good players end up on a couple of teams. Like the West, like I think Everett was very clearly the best team in the Western League this year, but doesn't mean they got enough at the trade deadline to get them over the hump here in the CHL tournament. I think they could. I think this is still a really, really good team. I think there's a different Western League team than some of the ones we've seen enter the Mem Cup. I think they have a really deep roster and they could go the distance, but that's always the issue with them between the other two leagues.
I should also say that I probably disrespected Tej Ginla when I said that Sam O'Reilly was the best forward in this year's field, because Tej is at the junior level this year was unbelievable. But
yeah, you're still not wrong.
O'Reilly's got a goal a game in these playoffs. I think it's a fair point. That's going to do it for us. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Athletic Hockey Show Prospect Series. You can, of course, catch more of Chris over at Flow Hockey and on his podcast called Up. I love that wave. And obviously, Scott and Corey coming out with new content every single day at The Athletic. We'll see you over there, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe and ring the bell to stay informed and catch new episodes every Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. And in the meantime, you can join our Discord community. We'll see you there.